but cold, bone chilling, I think 40 degrees for us here this morning. I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all about the VAV application that we have for the SE/VT8000 series. And let me just real quickly here share my screen. And let's see if we can get this ball rolling.
Dave, do you mind? Do you want to take questions at the end, or do you mind if people? It's not that big a group. Do you mind if people jump in and ask questions as you move through? Or would you?
Yeah, sure. No, sure. Questions over the course of the presentation are welcomed. I think that that's a good idea. So
okay.
If anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to interrupt me, because I get on a roll with this and just kind of roll through all the slides and talk about the application, what it looks like. So if you have any specific question, don't hesitate to stop and ask, and we'll see about answering it at that moment.
Okay, and for everybody, there's a chat feature. So if you're shy and don't want to just jump in the middle of the call, go ahead and send a chat message out, and I'll keep an eye on it and let Dave know that there's questions in writing. All right.
Awesome. So you should be able to see my screen by now, and it's the introduction of the slide deck for the room controller. So my name's David Moody. I'm a Solution Sales Support Manager here at Schneider Electric / Viconics. I work to support Ralph and all the other sales folks that sell this particular product. And as Ralph alluded to earlier, I actually work with the R&D team on a lot of our products that we put out in the marketplace. This particular one is one that we as a team have been asking for a long time, several years. And as it turns out, a few years ago, I just decided one day to sit down and turn a room controller into a VAV controller with all the Lua capabilities. And we'll talk about what Lua looks like in a room controller, but a little bit of the background here and how we came to this is I just sat down one day and said, hey, let's see what we can do with some Lua, and we created a VAV controller. And from there, an evolution to where we're at today of taking that application and working with the R&D team, and now we have it in a embedded firmware version and a physical part number that you can order online versus the Lua. So with that said, we're going to go through this presentation today, and we're going to cover, we're going to start off with the bundled package that we're offering for the VAV solution, and then where it fits and all of its features and networking and just some general information with how it will fit with all the other products that we have as far as the wireless products that communicate with it. So the idea here is to just talk about the VAV solution, and ironically, we will talk a little bit about VVT as well. So starting off, this slide here talks about our packaged bundle that we're offering today. So you can order a bundled package of the room controller, a damper actuator, a pressure transducer, and a temperature sensor as one part number, and it all shows up as a box. And in theory, you should be able to unbox it and put it on your VAV box and have a VAV controller. And this is kind of what it looks like from the sense of the parts down below. You have a room controller, the actuator, pressure transducer, and the temperature sensor. That all comes together as a kit, right? And we're going to talk about all this stuff separately, but I wanted to start off with saying we do have this bundle today. So most important thing here as we dive into this is where does it fit? Now, we're all familiar with solutions on the right here, like a self-contained solution. In this example, it's showing a Schneider Electric MPV and a RP room controller application. The MP is what you would typically see as a self-contained with the damper actuator built onto it, and you just plug your wires into it and you tie into a BMS system, and the air balancer uses some software tools to do all of his air balancing. Our VAV solution on the 8000 series to the left is not a replacement for those types of applications, right? And as you can see on the slide here, it talks about where it fits and where it doesn't fit. I would suggest to you that if you were doing a 2000 VAV box job, the VAV solution is probably not something that's going to fit in that, because it takes I wouldn't say more time, but when you're looking at a larger deployment in those quantities and you're connected to a enterprise type system or a supervisory system, then more of a self-contained solution fits. However, there are always going to be those applications and those larger scale deployments where you're in an executive office, part of the building, where the 8000 VAV solution would probably be more attractive, just simply because one of the biggest selling points of it is that it's got the sexiness, if you will, hanging on the wall of a touchscreen display, and the different colors and the messaging and things that can go on the screen, versus a self-contained type solution where you're typically looking at just a dumb sensor on the wall with a set point adjustment, maybe an occupancy override. So we're going to talk a little bit more over the course of this presentation about the VAV solution out of the 8000 and where it fits in that particular type application, and no longer compare it against these MP, RP / self-contained solutions. So first thing here is just kind of peeling the onion back on the VAV controller. From the last slide, one would say, well, it's pretty cost effective to put a self-contained controller in. What does it take to put something like this in? It looks like I've got to mount damper actuators and temperature sensors and things like that. It's going to cost me more money to do that. We've sat down and we've done a cost comparative of a self-contained type application versus a VAV controller on the wall here, and they pretty much balance themselves out as far as the total time to install it and the cost of the hardware. So the total cost of ownership is pretty much the same, right? And there are some things that you would have to do a little bit differently with this application versus self-contained, but at the end of the day, it's insignificant. And in particular, if you're looking for something that's what I would refer to as sexy hanging on the wall as far as a user interface. So the one thing about this controller is it's an embedded sequence of operation, so it's a configurable device. If you're familiar with the 8000 series product that we sell, both in the 8600 and the 8300 version, this is no different than those products, right? You power them up, you select some configuration on the screen, and in this example here, it's showing a setup screen, and you just kind of walk through the setup of the application, and it's plug and play, and it just works from that point forward. So all of the configuration is done at the screen. There's no software that's required. You don't have to connect it to a enterprise type solution / supervisory system to configure it. You can install this, configure it on the wall, and walk away from it, right? And at the same time, you can bring it into a supervisory system, and we'll talk about what that looks like in upcoming slides. So again, no software, there's no licensing, there's no downloading required. Pretty much anybody can configure one of these things and walk away from it. Any questions so far? No? All right, very good. So this slide here just talks about some of the applications, and they pretty much look the same, but if you peel the onion back a little bit on the left-hand side, you'll see that the top one is a pressure-independent application, and the one on the bottom is a pressure-dependent application. So in general, the room controller, when it comes out of the box, can be configured for a pressure-independent or a pressure-dependent type control. Now, what's important to understand about that is in the past, if you had a pressure-dependent type application, typically you would have used the 8300 series room controller. And it was designed to be able to do pressure dependent control just from a basic perspective of how you would do pressure dependent control. But the 8200 series is actually very specific to pressure dependent type control. So when you select that it's pressure dependent, there are very specific screens that are available to you to configure damper operation over an 8300 series. So the 8200 series is now the replacement, if you will, for a pressure dependent type application. I don't know about where you all are in your part of the country, but the Midwest, the Rust Belt / all the way over here to the West Coast, VVT applications are very predominant for us. And there's a lot of them out there that are still using a DOS-based laptop sitting on a pickle bucket inside of a janitor's closet, propped up, holding up a broom in a building. So really what I'm trying to say here is there's a lot of VVT applications out there that are ripe for replacement. And this product is a great starter for that. And if we have time towards the end, if there's an interest in talking about VVT, we can talk about a application that I've created using the 8200 series and an 8600 series in a standalone operation without any supervisory type control, and creating a self-contained VVT solution. But the point here is that the 8250 can be a pressure dependent or pressure independent. And as you can see, as I've been talking here on the slide deck, it handles every VAV application except dual duct. If you have a dual duct, it won't work with a dual duct. It's just not designed for that. And if you have an application for dual duct, it's something that we could talk about and see how we could address that. But out of the box, it is not something that it does all on its own. But from the sense of room controllers, and if you're familiar with them and all the things that an 8000 series can do, this device can do that as well. The 7-day clock, the heating with baseboard, duct heat, all of the wireless devices that are available to the system, they're all compatible with this particular product here, right? And you can see that we have the different communications protocols, and we'll talk about that specifically as we go through this slide deck.
Dave, I have a question. So on that back on that other slide, it says no fan powered boxes. Is that all of them, or you have no fan, series fan, parallel fan, on off, or ECM? There's no capability across the board on those?
Very confusing. I see what you mean by that. It really means a single duct VAV box, right, without a fan. So it can be a series or a parallel fan power with on-off control or ECM, or it can be your traditional VAV box that does not have a fan.
All right. So it's saying no fan, series, parallel. It can do them. Okay. Yep.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So this slide here just kind of talks about, high level of what you can configure and use within a room controller. And if I start to the left and work my way down from top to bottom, this room controller on a configurable input is exactly the same type of configurable input on any 8000 series. So you have your dry contacts for setback and motion detection if you want, window contacts. Yes, you can wire those up to this device, and it uses the onboard logic to do whatever energy conservation measure that may be enabled for that contact, right? Same thing with the configurable inputs, filters, door, override, service, all of those types of things you can connect into it, and the room controller just does what it's supposed to do from that application. And then we have normally open, normally closed on any kind of changeover that used in a VVT application. But it also works on the VAV application as well. The pressure independent application. Remote sensors, supply sensor, pressure transducer. Now, this is an important thing to understand about this device. You can use any pressure transducer that you like with it. That has a range of 1/2 inch to 5 inches. It's configurable. You just tell it, hey, I'm either 1/2 inch, and it works in 1/2 inch increments, 1 inch, 1.5 inch, all the way up to 5 inches. You can use anything that you like as long as it's 0 to 10 volts. It will not work with anything other than 0 to 10 volt pressure transducer. And in our kit here, in the bundled kit, this is the transducer you get. It's showed here, and it's a 0 to 1 inch transducer that's 0 to 10 volts DC. With that said, the capabilities of this room controller, just like any other 8000 series room controller, you have the ability to write custom Lua programming. We'll talk about that in a little more detail, but we have had customers that have a different type of pressure transducer that uses a different signal. We've had somebody that uses a 1/2 volt to 3.5 volts. You can make that work, but it does eat up one of the one of the additional inputs on the room controller to make that work. So what you really want to do, the message here is stick with 0 to 10 volts, right? Fans, again, series or parallel on off 0 to 10 volts. Baseboard heat, all the different typical normally open or closed, duct heat. And what's really unique about this applications is hallelujah to the guys in the R&D team. They really sat back and listened to what we had to say when we put this product together. Instead of just being 0 to 10 volts direct or reverse acting, we now have a 2 to 10 volts, right? Direct or reverse acting. So in the past, we've always been relegated to using 0 to 10 volts, and sometimes it's either been just direct acting or reverse acting. You have the capability to configure by poking it in the eye on the screen and changing it from a 0 to 10 to a 2 to 10, direct or reverse acting. And the same thing with the damper actuator as well. You can have 0 to 10 or 2 to 10 out of the box, and obviously floating as well. So this also talks about communications down at the bottom, BACnet MSTP, Modbus, or BACnet Wi-Fi IP, right? You'll notice that it says ZigBee field devices. It is absent of ZigBee on the communications network, right? This device is not, and I repeat, it is not compatible with the MPM product lines. There is no plans to make it compatible with the MPM gateways, right? So your communications are MSTP, Modbus, or BACnet Wi-Fi. And there'll be another slide that talks about that. So again, with the theme of lowest installed cost, sticking with the idea that everything is done at the room controller. So there's no software that the air balancer needs. And raise your hand here if you're on this call, right? In that you've been on jobs with VAV and you've had to deal with an air balancer that you've got to provide a laptop to, you've got to provide software to them, and you got to have somebody show them how to use it, and which essentially means that somebody just walks around with the air balancer and help do their job on these VAV applications. This product does not require any of that. In fact, you can't use that unless you connect it to a supervisory system. So it's designed for the installer, technician, air balancer to do everything on the screen, including in this example, testing the outputs. So you can see what's going on with the IO and change the output commands and watch a damper open or close, or the heat open and close, or turn on or off, whatever your configuration may be. You'll see that, as well as all the service screens with the temperatures and binary devices that may be connected to it, all on the HMI. This is another slide that really just kind of talks about the air balancer. As I was alluding to a while ago, everything that they would do, they do at the screen. And there are two screens for them to use, and it's balancing screen 1 and balancing screen 2. And as you can see on the slide here, this is where your set points are, and then they have in screen number 2 the ability to override the damper to a particular position, cool, heat, minimum flow, maximum flow, and then they have the opportunity, and we're calling it what it's really called, it's a bolometer, but they can actually put in the reading that they're getting out of the flow hood in there and do the offset and calibrate the box. Again, all at the screen. There's no getting up on a ladder using software. You can just walk up to it and plug that information into it. So this slide here talks about the communications protocols, right? And this is the 2 wired types of communication that you can have, right? One is a BACnet MS or Modbus RTU. Every room controller, 8000 series room controller that we sell has this capability, BACnet MS or Modbus. With the addition of a Wi-Fi card, BACnet IP Wi-Fi card, you now have the capability to do BACnet IP. You cannot do IP and MSTP at the same time. You can wire it up, but you have to choose. I'm either wired or I'm an IP device, and that's how it functions, right? Again, it is not compatible with MPMs. I can't stress that enough, because we've had a few folks that have bought them and connected them up to MPMs, and they said, hey, it's not working with an MPM because it's not compatible with it, right? So again, quick overview of communications. Usually I get some questions here about the Wi-Fi connectivity and stuff. Are there any questions floating around out there? All right, very good. So
quick, Dave, I'm going to jump in for just, I'm going to ask Frank directly. Frank, have you guys tested the Wi-Fi card, you and Matt?
No, actually, I don't have one, I don't believe.
Okay. So shame on me, and I'll send you a VAV box controller and a Wi-Fi card.
That would be great. Yeah, definitely we would, we'll work with it and test it and probably do some videos on it.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Frank.
Thanks.
Awesome. And as a point of reference, the Wi-Fi card, it's compatible with any 8000 series room controller. So you can take that Wi-Fi card that Ralph's going to send you, and you can put it in an 8600 or an 8300 room controller, and it's compatible with that. So this slide here talks about all of the wireless ecosystem devices that we have that will communicate with this particular product. And again, these devices will talk to any 8000 series room controller. And it's just a quick overview of the different things that we have. The wall mounted occupancy temp sensor, and then there's a ceiling mounted one at the bottom right. I start talking about these devices because it's important to understand that not only are they an occupancy sensor, they also have temperature and humidity built into them, right? So it's nice to have. And with the application of this device, and whether it's an 8200 or an 8300 or an 8600, the features that this room controller has is you can have up to 20 of these devices, all of these devices, a maximum of 20. But in a VAV application, think about that, right? Because you always have, somebody has the temperature sensor in their office, and that controls that VAV box, but the other 4 offices along that exposure don't have that. Well, with the wireless ecosystem, you can put these motion detectors in, not only can you have occupancy from that, but you can also get your temperature and humidity. I'm going to put humidity to the side for a second here because that doesn't exist on the West Coast. I know it does on the East, but from the perspective of talking about this, it's just temperature. And you can actually write a little Lua program and load inside of this device and have it look at the occupancy and say, if I'm occupied, then consider the temperature in this room. And you could go through and you could look at all 20 of those and you could say, I want a high, I want a low, I want an average, I want a medium, whatever you'd want to do. At that point, it just becomes, you know, a mathematical selection of what device / what room you want to use to control that VAV box. So I point this out because this is where the beauty of the wireless ecosystem comes in. It allows you to solve some problems that typically exist in buildings where I've mounted a device, temperature sensor to control the VAV box, but I've got, you know, 10 other people that want to have a say on that. Now you can kind of do that all with one device, right? It doesn't have to.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Question.
I have a question about, so does the wall sensor have to have the Wi-Fi card in it to get those 20 sensors?
No, so the wall device, the room controller in the middle has to have a ZigBee radio embedded on it to do that.
Okay, so is it ZigBee or Wi-Fi?
Very good question. So the ZigBee, which is what we're looking at right here, is to field devices. The
Right.
Wi-Fi is your network trunk back to your supervisory type system.
Okay, so you're not using ZigBee as your, you know, your BACnet communication anymore?
Not on
this practice.
Not on this product, right? So it's the only product that we sell that is not compatible with the NPM. So from the perspective of, you know, your networking of all of your devices, all of your room controllers back to a supervisory system, you can't do it via ZigBee. You can only do it with MSTP, Modbus, or Wi-Fi. Then,
so is there, because I'm just getting, so if it's a wired BACnet, that will not work with this ZigBee, or you have to add a card to it?
yeah. So there's two distinctive things going on in every room controller. You have your network communications, and then you have your field bus communication. So your network can be MSTP, Modbus, or Wi-Fi, right? And then your field communications to your field devices is ZigBee. So, and this is where I talk about the ZigBee / Wi-Fi, right? And what's important to understand when you buy one of these. There's only one expansion slot on a room controller, right? And that expansion slot can handle a CO2 module, a ZigBee radio module, or a Wi-Fi radio module. And it's important to understand that if you buy a room controller and you want to talk to field devices, you have to have ZigBee. So you put the ZigBee module in it. But then tomorrow, the customer comes back and says, hey, you know, I'd really like to put this on Wi-Fi and communicate Wi-Fi to my supervisory system. And now you're in a conundrum because there's only one expansion slot and you put the ZigBee radio in that spot and you have some ZigBee devices out there. Now you want to put Wi-Fi on it. You can't. We love it because you're going to have to buy another room controller, and that room controller will have the ZigBee radio embedded on it, right? Which leaves the slot available for your Wi-Fi module. So the message is that when you buy these, you should always consider buying them with the ZigBee radio embedded so it can talk to the field devices like we're showing here. And then that leaves the slot available for the Wi-Fi module if you want to upsell that somewhere down the road to the customer. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Why don't you just only sell that one?
Yeah. Well, sometimes people, options, right? Sometimes people, they don't want the ZigBee radio. They know that they don't want the ZigBee radio, so they don't buy it with the ZigBee embedded on it, which adds a few dollars to it, right? But I cannot tell you how many times people have come back and they've said, "Hey, I got this ZigBee need for some door contacts. I want to monitor the door and use that energy conservation measure that's built into the room controller, but I've got a Wi-Fi module installed in the slot. How do I make that work?" Well, you throw that room controller away and you buy a new one with the ZigBee radio on it. So it's just an option thing that they provide folks.
So Dave, let me make sure I was clear on that. There were 3 different ways for the one expansion slot: ZigBee, Wi-Fi, and what was the third one?
CO2 module.
Okay. So we should try to upsell the ZigBee embedded on it so they can use the Wi-Fi card if they need to.
Yes.
What's the list cost difference in the ZigBee and non-ZigBee? Is it even worth, stocking for us anyway, the non-ZigBee?
That I don't know off the top of my head what that looks like.
I'll give you an
That's
idea
fine.
in just a couple of minutes, George.
Take your time, Ralph. We can take that offline. That's not a big deal. I was just
Okay.
curious on our end.
Yeah, it's I always like to think ahead, right, when I'm putting projects together and things. So that's why I always say get the room controller with the embedded ZigBee on it. Then you have that expansion slot available to upsell Wi-Fi tomorrow if you wanted to, right? And again, it boils down to what the selling situation looks like. So sometimes customers don't have a lot of money in their budget and they want to get something in, which is where this device is strongly suited to, is that we can get it in and then you can add things to it later. But that is the one thing that you have to be very cautious about. Everybody's seen the movie Indiana Jones: The Last Crusade, and there's that scene in there where the Templar Knight says, "You must choose wisely," when Indiana Jones is trying to find the goblet of life, right? And that's very much what you have here. You have to choose which room controller, but choose wisely, right? Does it have the ZigBee embedded or not? So I probably just exposed some of my geekness there, talking about Indiana Jones, but nonetheless, the ZigBee devices here, again, talking about them, they all do different things, right? So your occupancy sensors have temperature and humidity. So you're getting 3 things out of one device there. Whereas door and window contacts, they're the same device, but they do different things depending on how you've configured that energy conservation measure in the room controller. And then the water leak detector, that's great to have if you have a hot water coil and you want to understand if there is a water leak, besides looking up at the ceiling and seeing the stain on the ceiling. That will talk to it. And then more importantly is the one at the very top, is the CO2 temperature and humidity sensor. You can get that just in CO2, or you can get it in all 3. And that's a pretty slick device. That's actually the only device that we have that's a ZigBee green device. And everything else is not ZigBee green. And really what that means is it's a device that's designed to use its battery over the course of 10 years, up to 10 years. Whereas the other devices, they're replaceable batteries, and they're typically 3 to 5 years, depending on its application. For example, door contact, right? If you're putting it in a dorm room and some kids are going in and out of the dorm room all day long, every day, it's not going to last you 3 years. It may last you a year, right? And that's just because of its use and the way it reports data back. Whereas the ZigBee green device at the top, it reports data a little bit differently. And that allows you to get the up to 10 years out of it. And that device, it does not have a battery that can be replaced. It's a disposable device. So when it's dead, you just buy a new one and replace it. And all of these devices provide feedback on the screen, and if it's connected to a supervisory system, it will tell you that the battery's low or it's lost communications with a device. So you do have that visibility both locally in a standalone operation or connected through a supervisory device. Any questions on this slide? Okay, very good. So this slide here is just a quick slide to talk about one of the energy conservation measures that's built into every room controller, whether it's the 8250, an 8350, or an 8650, they all operate the same from the perspective of having an occupied set point, a standby set point, and an unoccupied. So think of my normal temperature, something that I can live with if I'm not in the room, / there's nobody in here. So that's occupied, standby, and unoccupied. And you have a different set point for each one of those modes. And this is just a quick little chart to kind of show you what that looks like. And your occupancy is determined off of your PIR, which you can get one embedded in the room controller, which they're showing there. Or you can use a wireless or a hardwired occupancy sensor into the room controller as well. Just quick understanding of what a room controller looks like. On the left, you've got your Schneider. On your right, you have your Viconics. At the end of the day, they're exactly the same firmware that's built into them. The only thing that differentiates them between the two is obviously the one on the left's a little more square than the one on the right. It's a little more rounded, right? And as far as the physical appearance, that's it. And then each room controller has the ability to display a short message, a BACnet short message, and they're not showing it on this particular screen, but on a Schneider Electric, it's displayed across the top between the date and the occupancy status. It scrolls across the top. On the Viconics brand, it scrolls at the very bottom below all the buttons that you see. So you can kind of see that the buttons between the two are placed a little differently. So that's the only difference between them. But they all operate the same internally. And what's important to understand about this screen is that it's kind of giving you an example of all the information that can be displayed on the screen. But if you're familiar with a room controller or not, there are 12, I think we're at 12 different types of HMI displays. And this would be a human machine interface, right, for you to look at. You can configure the screen up to 12 different variations, which at the end of the day just means that some of these buttons are displayed or not displayed, or values are displayed or not displayed on the screen, right? So you have that flexibility. And I think we're up to 13 different colors. That really doesn't float my boat, but you do have 13 different colors to choose from for displaying. In this example on the left, it's white. On the right, it's blue. And again, whatever colors you want to select, you can do. Now,
Dave, can I jump in
Yeah.
for just a quick second? So on the Schneider version, it is there's a Schneider brand actually on the bottom of the thermostat. It says Schneider Electric. You can't really see it, but it's embedded in the plastic. The Viconics version has no visible branding on board, so that's why it's such a popular solution when you're selling it along with a Honeywell solution or a Johnson solution, right? So just to let you know, I just wanted you to be careful because I know you might like the squared one a little bit better, but yeah, I'm just I want to let you know that. The other thing, as far as colored screens are concerned, we've done some cool things with customers with the color changes. So things like, green is neutral, blue is it's in cooling mode, red it's in heating mode. So keep that in mind when you're talking about jobs or trying to differentiate yourself. We can do it through the colors. We could do it through custom messaging on the bottom of the screen for your customer. So we can show alarms, alerts, room numbers, things like that. That's all customizable. So, okay, I'll jump out. Sorry, Dave.
Yep, that's a very good point, Ralph. Again, just to kind of recap that, the Schneider, and as you pointed out, you can't really see it, but at the bottom right-hand side on the faceplate, it actually says Schneider Electric versus the Viconics does not. And the other piece to that is you can see there's a bezel on the Schneider Electric one on the left. You can actually take that off and order a different bezel. They have, I want to say there's like a dozen different types of bezels. There's a glossy black, there's a silver, there's all kinds of different. I think there's a wood one. We still sell a wood that just pops off and pops back on there. Whereas the Viconics, you don't have that capability to do that there. And to your point, Ralph, the thing with the colors, that is something that's kind of popular with the room controller. And again, this is something you don't get with a self-contained VAV controller. This room controller has that capability built into it that you can change those colors, from blue for cooling, red for heating, and maybe if there's a water leak that the up in the ceiling, that it changes orange. Orange is a color that we have. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with it. It's kind of like, theater of the mind, figure out what you want to do. And we can probably pretty much make that work with the custom programming that's embedded in each one of these. The other thing to point out on this screen is at the bottom, on the bottom left, that's the BACnet long message. So you can display a BACnet long message, and on the far right, it's a custom image. You can upload a custom image into the room controller, so you can brand it yourself and put whatever message that you would want on there with that custom image. And we'll talk about how you make that all happen here. And that's here, right? So how you access a room controller to upload firmware or put that custom message on it, or the custom programming, you would use this uploader tool that we have.
Dave,
and it's, yes.
Dave, can I interrupt just real quick? One other thing that I don't think you mentioned was the customizable button on the bottom of the screen, on the lower right-hand side, on the previous slide.
Right here.
The question mark.
Yeah.
Right. So you can use that for custom operations. So you can write a Lewis script behind this that allows you to take action, right, based on a button press, or that can bring you to some of the menus. So if you wanted to go to the balancing menu, right, you could actually set that button to bring you to the balancing menu. So there's a library of icons like light bulbs and green leaves and things like that you can access to display on the screen and do those custom types of operations, including things like shade and blind control, which we didn't really talk about, but you can drive outputs on the controller from that button if you wanted to do something like that. So
yeah, very, very good point. There are I think 14 different icons that you can change that question mark to, the question mark being one of them. And then there, I think, are, I want to say 12 specific functions that when you press that button, it will do something, right? Beyond those specific functions, if you pressed it, you could write some custom Lua programming and make, when you press that button, something happen, right? Flush the toilets, whatever it may be, right? Whatever you're trying to do with the room controller, you could do that. And the thing to point out, and this kind of takes me into the Lua in the next screen, is that any of those buttons that you see on the screen, the ones at the bottom, and in this example, they're only showing 3, but there's 5 that go across the bottom, and then you have your up and down arrows. Any of those buttons, when you press them, you can actually read that button press on the screen, right? And when you read that button press, you can take action, right? So if somebody raised the temperature, I'm just spitballing here, right? If somebody raised the temperature by pressing that button 5 times, then, you automatically change the set point back to some predetermined value, right? You don't allow them to do that. Or if somebody pressed the question button, that, it closed the blinds in the room. So, it's, again, the theater of the mind. Whatever you would want to do with a sequence, you can do that, which takes me into this screen here. And I was talking a little bit about how you use this tool, which was going to take me into what Lua is, right? I don't have a slide specifically to talk about Lua here, but Lua is a programming language, and it's a text-based programming language. You don't need a tool for it. We recommend Notepad++. It's free. It's a great application to write Lua with, but you can use Word, right? And a text in a text format, or Notepad on your computer, anything that's a .txt file, you can write Lua programs. And Lua programming is a text-based program. It's not what the kids are using nowadays with graphical, wireframes and all that, and they're building, lines across the screen and boxes. This is old school. If this equals that, then do this, right? Every room controller that we sell in an 8000 series model line has this built into it, and it is very powerful. You can do a lot of things with it. And as I started this presentation, I was talking about a few years ago, I just kind of sat down and I said, hey, I'm going to create this VAV program. I actually took an 8600 room controller, which is an RTU controller, and I wrote a VAV, basically what I've been showing you here. I've wrote all of that in Lua to work in an 8600. So the point is you can take this 8250 room controller, and you can make it do pretty much anything that you want, right? Besides the out of the box functionality that it has. You can get creative, and you can write programs to configure it itself, change set points back, at midnight to something else. These are just kind of some things off the top of my head that people use. Place it in cooling mode when the outside air temperature is a particular value. Those are all things that are customizable that you would write in Lua. And once you do that, and that button that Ralph was referring to is one of those things that you do with Lua. You can write a Lua script that says, if this button is pressed, then do this, right? Once you've done that, this is how you get it inside of the room controller. This is one of the ways you do that. And this is the uploader tool. And the uploader tool does many things, right? It does firmware updates. It loads the Lua program into it. It also allows you to put that custom image into it. But one of the other features that it has is it allows you to back up the configuration of a room controller. So if you've configured one, you want to plug into it and you want to get its configuration out of it, you save it. And then if you want to go to another room controller and plug into it, you can take that saved configuration and you can upload it into the room controller and it will configure it. So you don't have to push all the buttons and configure every room controller. You just plug into it and it configures it and you walk away, right? That's what this tool does. The tool's free. It connects from a Windows PC to a room controller via a micro USB, which you see on the bottom right-hand side there. And what's important to understand is we're working on a new version of the firmware where it gets rid of the uploader tool. We'll always have it, but you can do firmware updates and basically everything that we've been talking about here with the uploader tool via a supervisory system. We're working on that firmware. It definitely will not be out in 2020. It'll be somewhere first part of 2021. If it's connected via supervisory, you have the capability to do all the stuff that the uploader tool is doing here today. Questions? No? All right. We're towards the end here. This is just a quick table of the different part numbers with the way you can order room controllers in the different colors. On the Schneider side, you have white and silver. In the Viconics, it's just white, and the different part numbers that you can order them as. And all of them with a P at the very end of it includes the ZigBee radio embedded on the room controller. So that leaves the expansion slot open for the optional accessories down at the bottom, the CO2, Wi-Fi or well, you don't need the ZigBee card if you have it embedded at that point. One thing to understand too about the CO2 card is you don't have to use a CO2 card to make CO2 work with the room controller. You can use the wall-mounted wireless ZigBee one, or you can hardwire your favorite 0 to 10 volt CO2 sensor into it as well. There's an input in the room controller for that.
So this might be a question for Ralph, but in the email we sent out, we had a kit part number that was VAV kit 1, and that's using the room controller, the 5000B. So will there be a new kit if we decide to go with the ZigBee on board? There'll be a different kit number, I'm guessing, right?
Go ahead, Dave. You want to answer that?
Well, go ahead, Ralph. You go ahead and take that.
So the answer is I don't know. That's a great question. What I can do is I put together competitive pricing for the kit anyway, Paul, if you had that come up. So, but I'm going to suggest to the product manager that he puts out a second kit. That's a really good point. So, okay. Thank you.
Yeah, that is a good question, because when we were imagine this, we've had a few conversations behind the scenes to come up with this part number that you see here, this kit 1, right? And what this slide actually looks like and how things should be included with it. And it was discussed to have an embedded ZigBee version of that, but they said, let's put kit number 1 out, right? And that's why it became kit 1, right? So if there is that interest and there's that desire to see it as an embedded ZigBee, then I think you'll see a kit number 2 price come out.
And just to jump in, the cost of the ZigBee, list price on the ZigBee option is approximately $200. So just to let you know, because George asked that earlier. So
that was a question I had when you showed those parts. You can only get ZigBee with occupancy and temp, humidity. Was there one other thing?
To the bottom. Sorry, scroll through this.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's correct in the model number series. But what I'll do is I can work with you guys. I'll take the cost of the occupancy sensor out of it if you're not going to use it. So just be honest with me. That's all. So
yeah. I mean, we rarely use the occupancy sensor ever. You know what I mean? Just hasn't come up much in my dealings. I don't know if anybody else in our territory has it. So
yeah, fair enough. And we're trying to. So the intent is down the road they're going to manufacture one without the occupancy sensor. That's what I've been told. Just don't know when that's going to happen. So okay. I have approval to take the cost of that out of the product.
All right. Thanks, Ralph.
So just kind of wrapping up here in the last 5 minutes that we have set aside, take a minute or so here. Just to recap, as far as a room controller goes in this application, again, it's not going to replace any self-contained solutions. We're not trying to set the world on fire to say a room controller on the left is going to replace all of your types of applications with self-contained. I think that it has a lot of applications, right? Because you always have those customers that say, I don't like that sensor that's hanging on the wall. You don't really have a lot of choice in those self-contained, whereas if you go in this direction, you have that. You also have an entire wireless ecosystem that you can, solve problems. Standalone, it doesn't require supervisory network to solve those problems. And it has that sexiness hanging on the wall, right? A lot of folks want to see that today. So you have that. And lastly, no software, right? No licensing. An air balancer, and this is the beauty of it, I think, is that when you have a job, the air balancer expects you to walk around and hold their hand and give them software and a laptop training. It's like, nope, I'm going to show you 5 minutes on how to use a room controller. You walk up to every single one of them, do what you want to do to it, and leave me alone. I'm working on what I got to do on my job. You go do your job, Mr. Air Balancer, right? So there's a lot of that flexibility using this product. Lastly, before I start asking if there's any more questions, I have taken this product that you're looking at right here and an 8650, and I've created a VVT application where the 8650 Standalone does bypass damper control in all of your RTU type functionality, economizer, all of that, CO2, demand ventilation, all of that stuff, right? Heat, cool. But in a standalone application that it will operate as the system manager and go out and talk to each one of these 8250s that are in its environment and decide, who's my heating, who's my cooling collars, and control the RTU, all standalone. You don't need a supervisory system to make that happen. You just need to make sure that you either have BACnet IP Wi-Fi or MSTP between all of the devices, and it is a standalone type application. So there is that availability in a VVT using this bundle. And obviously in this bundle, you don't need a pressure transducer with it, but we do have that solution available today.
Yeah. And Dave, that requires you to load Lua script into the 8650, correct?
Yes, that's a very good point. So if you do decide to go down the VVT application road, there's a Lua script that goes in the 8650 and the 8250. And that script allows you to take the devices and mutate them into the VVT application. So that's all the food that I had for the Dog and Pony show. Is there any questions that anybody may have here on the call?
I have a question about your VVT application. So does that 8650 become a zone itself, or is that just the rooftop controller?
It's the rooftop controller, right? So the idea behind it is that's controlling the rooftop. And then for every zone damper that you have out there, you put an 8250 on it.
Okay. Does it do VFD or change over bypass?
So it will do any analog out capacity control that you want for your static pressure, right? Whether it's a VFD or a bypass damper, it's set up to be a 0 to 10 volt, and you can make it a 2 to 10 volt. You can make it any voltage range that you want in the application, but it's an analog output control for whatever you've connected it to.
Oh, and another question I had is how many stages of heat can the 8250 do?
Well, by default, it will do these two that you see here, right? So it's got a duct heat and a baseboard heat. That's default, right? If you have something special that you want to do, then you can write a Lua script and you can use one of the IOs that are available on the room controller for that.
All right, because like in the Northeast where we are, you see up to 4 stages just in the duct sometimes. I don't know if there's any capability of that.
Yeah, you might run out of outputs when you go that many, but we just have to look at the application. So there are 7 inputs and 9 outputs on every room controller, and you can make them do whatever you want. But obviously, some of them are dedicated right here. So for the damper actuator, that's one of your 9 outputs. But by default, it does the 2 stages.
So George, in a case like that, you could use a transducer if you needed to, a 0 to 10 volt staged transducer, right? So if you didn't have enough outputs.
That's fine. I mean, we don't see 4 that often, but there's a capability. Definitely 2, and not including baseboard. So definitely a 2-stage reheat box is pretty common.
Yeah,
and that would be easy to do in Lua.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, easy enough to do in Lua for it. Yeah.
So is there a Lua script training?
Go ahead,
Ralph.
I was going to say, we don't have a formal Lua script training, but we do it all the time. And we could either maybe get Dave to do it, or we can get Steve Winterberger to do it, either way. So
that we do that a lot for folks. We sit down and do some Lua training with them, and then and Lua's kind of like it's one of those things that we do internally. We'll write something for you, and we'll do it often, right? If you come and said, hey, I got an application, it needs to be done in Lua, can you do it? Either Steve or myself we'll sit down and bang it out. The only thing that we ask is that, you know, you document it, right? It's like send an email that says this is what I want it to do versus a phone call. So we'll bang it out, and we'll do that often for a lot of folks. And at the end of the day, usually what happens is we do that enough, and we do some training that eventually someone within, you know, your organization understands how to use the Lua and write it, and how the room controller interacts with that. And then, you know, we usually don't get those phone calls anymore from the perspective of writing the Lua scripts, but we do it all day long for people.
It's really easy to read, George, because it's English based, and you can, once you look at one, you can pretty much figure out, or a couple of them, how to blend them and make them work together. So pretty quickly you can get proficient at it. So yeah, but it definitely will set up a class. You guys just give me a date and time, and I'll set it up for you. Anything else? All right, we're a little bit over on time, so it's 1:04. I really want to thank all of you for joining, and great questions. I've recorded this. We'll see how good the quality is. I will send it over to Brian, and so you can review it at your leisure, or share it if you wish. And then if there's any other questions, or you want to do a follow-up training, just shout out. If there's anything you want specific, like an SE8000 specific training, or a Lua training around how to manipulate the SE8000 to do all those cool things we talked about, we can do anything like that. We can create anything like that for you, so, and your customers, obviously. So
You share the slide deck with us, Ralph?
yeah, I'll get the slide deck out to you too, if Dave's willing to share it.
All right,
I think
Sure, I'll send it over to you, Ralph, and do what you like with that.
Yep. I'll send everything to Brian and let him, get it to the team. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah.
Do we trust Brian to do that, or should I send it to somebody else?
No, you can get it. I got it.
Just kidding, Brian. Okay.
You know, if I can just real quick, the thing about this VAV solution is it's unique in its application that allows it to be standalone versus, you know, your traditional VAV type applications that we always see out there. It's very cost effective to do that. And more importantly is a lot of folks get hung up on the room controller, all 8000 series, whether it's the 8300, which is 2-pipe or 4-pipe fan coil, or an 8600, which is, you know, an RTU / heat pump / split systems, or the 8200. All of them have the capability to have that Lua programming used inside of them. And that's what's unique about this, because if you take a room controller out of the box and it's firmware and you plug it on the wall, and yeah, you can configure it and it will do what it's supposed to do, but you can get, forgive me, you can get crazy with it and use those IO to do a lot of different things with it. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we've done with it, we've turned it into a 4-zone lighting controller. So you can go out and spend, if you've ever put lighting control systems in, a 4-zone lighting control system, fully featured, you know, egress, tied-in alarm system, on-off scheduling, dimming, and all that, not dimming, but outdoor light level, all that kind of stuff. That's going to set you back just for the controller easily $1,000, right? You can do all of that with any room controller with Lua. We can do all, and we've done that before. So the message is that it's very flexible, but yet it's also very specific. So I'll leave you with that.
I'm curious as to the cost. I don't know if you guys looked at the Simply VAV from KMC, you know, what the cost comparison was. So we sell, you know, a decent amount of that. One building flat spec that, but I think, you know, I think if the pricing's right, we can start moving this to replace that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what you pay for that solution, George, but you can do the cost comparison.
Yeah,
based on what, yeah. So.
Yeah, and just, you know, there's so much, and I know we're running over here. One last thing, because this is new to our tool set here, is that at the factory now, if you have large enough customer / orders, you're buying a lot of these, and you have a very specific application / you want your logo on it, they will at the factory for, just a very small handful of dollars, they will load your custom Lua, your application, and your image at the end of the assembly line, and you'll have your own part number for that. That is yours, right? So we have some customers across the country, not in a VAV application, but in more of like an RTU. Los Angeles Unified School District is a great example of it. They're the largest physical footprint of school systems in the entire United States. They have their own part number for an 8600, and when it rolls off the assembly line, it shows up in the box with their part number on it, and it's configured to do a very specific functionality for them across they have like 50,000 room controllers, right, in their application. So there is that capability as well today with our factory.
All right. Any more questions? You're welcome. All right, everybody. It was our pleasure. And,
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good one.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
As I used to say in Hill Street Blues, be safe out there.
That
That kind of dates me, but okay.
It is dating me.
Yes.
Come on, Ralph.
Yes, like my Indiana Jones.
That's all right.
Right, exactly. All right, guys.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.